Yeah, the distinct sound of explosions on the horizon here in Kiev. We've heard at least four what appear to be strikes lighting up the night sky.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the moments from 2020 to 2025 that made the world stand still.
If you or anyone in your household has one of those two symptoms, then you should stay at home for 14 days.
Number 10, the death of Elizabeth II.
The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Everything has to come to an end eventually, even the reigns of monarchs we might have expected to just go on forever. That's exactly what happened on September 8, 2022, when the incumbent Queen Elizabeth died at the impressive age of 96. She had held the throne from February of 1952, making her the longest reigning British monarch in history and the second longest of any sovereign state.
She belonged to Britain, but America is mourning too. Queen Elizabeth's remarkable reign spanned nearly one-third the life of this nation.
This just seemed like such a significant moment, the passing of this woman who's been kind of the stalwart figure in the back of our minds for the past 70 years.
President Biden saying she was more than a monarch. She defined an era.
Beloved around the world for her poise and class, the Queen proved more popular than the monarchy itself, with her reign cited as the reason that commonwealths like Australia chose not to become independent republics. In fact, her state funeral was one of the most watched television events in British history, with over 26 million viewers.
Service in life, hope in death. All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again."
Number 9, the fall of the Assad regime.
On Sunday morning at 2:30 a.m., there was no one left in the palace, except for me and another person from the media and political office. He did not tell anyone where he was going.
We now know Assad fled to Russia that Sunday before sunrise, and that the palace had lied to the Syrian people.
From the time of the bloodless corrective movement, the dynastic Assad family ruled the West Asian country of Syria with an iron fist. Hafez al-Assad oversaw a highly oppressive regime until his 2000 death, at which point he was replaced by his son Bashar. The younger al-Assad cultivated a personalist dictatorship around himself and commanded one of the most repressive totalitarian regimes in history.
He might still have saved the country from war by embracing reform. But instead of that, Bashar al-Assad went to his rubber-stamped parliament in March 2011, declared foreigners were conspiring to destroy Syria, and effectively declared war on any Syrian who opposed him.
Responsible for numerous human rights violations as well as countless civilian deaths, al-Assad's reign came to a sudden and anticlimactic end in December of 2024, when he was overthrown by opposition forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a paramilitary group.
The regime retreated as the rebels closed in, storming the Iranian embassy here and taking over the presidential palace. Now here, people can be seen inside taking photos and selfies, walking through the corridors and rooms. What's at the heart of the regime?
Number 8, the assassination of Brian Thompson.
Police are telling us this looks to be a targeted attack. It was very specific. They just don't know why he was targeted, and the investigation is starting. Meantime, that shooter ran off down an alley and is still at large in New York City right now.
50-year-old Thompson, the CEO of American health insurance giant United Healthcare, was shot to death just outside of the New York Hilton Midtown shortly before 7 a.m. on December 4, 2024. Following an overwhelmingly publicized manhunt, 26-year-old Luigi Mangione was arrested 5 days later in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and charged with Thompson's murder.
The fake ID matched the ID that was used to check into the New York City hostel before the shooting, according to the New York Police Commissioner. Authorities say they also found a handwritten document that speaks to his, quote, motivation and mindset.
In turn, Mangione has been hailed as a kind of modern-day folk hero, praised on social media for taking a stand against what many feel is the predatory nature of the American healthcare system. Mangione faces federal charges, in addition to separate charges in New York and Pennsylvania.
Luigi Mangione pleading not guilty to federal charges in the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Prosecutors declaring their intent to seek the death penalty.
Number 7, the AI boom.
The way that Silicon Valley and OpenAI leading the charge has really approached AI development is very much an embodiment of the way Silicon Valley has developed technology over the last decade, which is growth at all costs. They have really chosen to pursue AI models that are extraordinarily large. They require a lot of data.
Maybe this one is a bit of a cheat, considering it's not limited to a single moment. But regardless, it is undeniable that we are living through an extraordinary time of technological and thus societal change. No, you're not imagining it. We went from not talking about artificial intelligence at all to it becoming an integral part of our daily lives.
China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology says China since last year has produced nearly 100 embodied AI robotic products, claiming the country holds 70% of the global market, due largely to its unrivaled stem-to-stern supply chain of critical parts and advancements in its own AI and chips.
Focus has been increasingly drawn to the ubiquitous use of large language models and generative AI, which has rapidly overhauled the global workforce in its image. Scientists and researchers are constantly finding new ways to implement AI into various domains like health, art, and business. Yes, AI will be a force for change, but it's important to consider what kind of change it'll force.
Others are concerned about the psychological and ethical impact of an AI companion.
Get to configure them in a way that really attends to all of your needs. You don't even know what it is that you need. Humans, unfortunately, especially insecure humans, are sometimes not to be really trusted with her.
Number 6, the January 6th United States Capitol attack.
The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens, and you guys did this to us.
In a political movement largely seen as being without precedent in American history, U.S. President Donald Trump refused to concede the 2020 election to his opponent, Democratic candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden. Baselessly accusing the Democratic Party of rigging the election in Biden's favor, Trump encouraged his supporters to storm the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. in order to prevent the certification of election votes in a joint session of Congress.
We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
The attempted insurrection was a failure, and Biden was sworn into office just a few weeks later. Ultimately, 9 people died as a result of the attack. 174 police officers were injured, and rioters caused an estimated $2.7 million in damages.
We found it's still taxpayers largely on the hook for all the repairs and recovery from a very damaging U.S. Capitol siege. The estimates given in the court system from the U.S. Department of Justice is roughly $3 million or so in repairs to the historic windows, doors, marble, and art, and the cleanup.
Number 5, the George Floyd protests.
I believe what I saw, and what I saw was wrong at every level.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey announced the 4 responding MPD officers involved in the death of George Floyd have been terminated.
When you hear someone calling for help, you are supposed to help. This officer failed in the most basic human sense.
The 2020 murder of unarmed black man George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota ignited what was perhaps the biggest American protest movement of the 21st century thus far. Police officer Derek Chauvin was filmed with his knee on Floyd's neck as a means of restraining him, supposedly in retaliation for Floyd's alleged use of a counterfeit bill at a nearby establishment. Chauvin was condemned globally for his use of excessive force and, following a mass wave of protests in support of Black Lives Matter, was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. Worldwide demonstrations that called for Chauvin to face justice for his actions occurred in several countries around the world, sparking conversations about police brutality and accountability.
President Joe Biden said Derek Chauvin's sentence seems to be appropriate, while George Floyd's family is expressing mixed reaction. 22.5 years is less than the maximum, but 10 years above the minimum sentence. Derek Chauvin showed no reaction when Judge Peter Cahill announced his fate today.
Number 4, the worst economic crisis in history.
During the pandemic, vehicle production slowed. Add in the microchip shortage, and the cost of cars rose a biting 5% over last year. It's one of the main drivers of rising inflation. up 3.7% across the economy year over year compared to last July. That's the highest spike in a decade.
In case you needed further proof that we're living through unprecedented times, the ongoing financial nightmare has been estimated to be even more damaging than the Great Depression. Perhaps the most obvious contributor was the COVID-19 pandemic. More on that later, which abruptly upended global supply chains and caused a devastating but mercifully short-lived stock market crash.
A lot of money flooded the market, supply chain shut down. Too much money chasing too few goods drives prices up.
So supply can't keep up with the demand, basically.
It can't, and also the amount of currency in circulation is also greater. So that too adds to elevated prices.
An inflation surge in mid-2021 proved that the global economy was far from out of the woods, attributed to housing shortages and government budget deficits. While that surge has technically ended, top economists have made the troubling suggestion that consumer prices are unlikely to decrease to their pre-pandemic levels.
Nearly 30% of consumers say they're spending less at the store. Many viewers have told me they're making smaller and more intentional trips. So how are people adjusting? Well, 47% say they're shopping with a needs versus want mindset.
Number 3, the Gaza war. It probably goes without saying that the situation in the Middle East is more than a little complicated, and has been for thousands of years. However, simmering tensions boiled over in a massive way on October 7, 2023, when the extremist militant group Hamas initiated a surprise attack on Israel, describing it as retribution for its colonial occupation of Palestinian territory. The attack resulted in nearly 1,200 total deaths, and the Israeli government responded by invading the Gaza Strip and launching a bombing campaign that has resulted in over 77,000 Palestinian deaths. Several ceasefire attempts have proven unsuccessful, and the conflict has extended to other parts of the region, particularly Lebanon and Iran. Number 2, the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
After the U.S. warned all day of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, that it was imminent, Vladimir Putin has just addressed the Russian people moments ago, announcing what Putin called the start of a military special operation, in his words, to demilitarize Ukraine. That Russia would bring in troops. He told Ukrainian troops to lay down arms and go home.
To be totally clear, it's worth noting that 2022 did not mark the beginning of Russia's attempt to annex neighboring Ukraine. That began in 2014, kicking off an ongoing war effort. Having said that, 2022 marked a significant escalation in the conflict.
Yeah, the distinct sound of explosions on the horizon here in Kiev. We've heard at least 4 what appear to be strikes lighting up the night sky just in the last really 10 minutes or so. As you say, it looks like the darkest day has come to pass following this speech by Vladimir Putin.
On February 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the beginning of a, quote, special military operation, which was largely interpreted by the international community as a euphemism for an all-out invasion. Amidst hundreds of thousands of civilian and military deaths, the Russo-Ukrainian war has stoked global fears of what could happen if Putin achieves his goals.
Вот о чем речь. Ну поймите же вы в конце концов. Не мы кому-то угрожаем. Мы что ли пришли туда к границам США? Или к границам Великобритании? Или куда? К нам пришли.
So the two major goals for Vladimir Putin is, one, to kind of keep Ukraine close to Russia, and number 2 is to keep Ukraine away from the West.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good evening. As the pandemic of coronavirus claims more lives around the world, the people of the United Kingdom are now being advised to make drastic changes to their day-to-day existence. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, rejected criticism that his government had been slow to respond to the scale of this crisis.
Regardless of whether you thought COVID was a legitimate global health emergency or a deep state conspiracy to control the population, it's inarguable that the pandemic was a frightening, uncertain, and deeply challenging time. Even if you weren't personally affected by the coronavirus itself, you were undoubtedly hit by one of its side effects.
Yossi Sheffi is one of the world's leading supply chain experts and heads the department at MIT.
He predicted years ago in a book that a pandemic would grind the world's supply chain to a halt, and even called for ventilators to be manufactured in the thousands to fend off a virus like COVID-19. And now we are seeing how consumer and pharmaceutical products will take a while to make a comeback in the U.S.
Those included a disruption of the global economy, supply chain shortages, and a moratorium on in-person encounters. Most of the fear stemmed from the confusion around the virus, as well as the heavy volume of social media disinformation about it. The World Health Organization still considers COVID to be an active pandemic, and it's likely that we'll be feeling its effects for years, possibly even generations to come.
The pandemic was associated with a rise in hospitalizations for mental health issues such as anxiety, self-harm, and eating disorders across Canada. That's according to a study conducted by Montreal researchers as a part of a larger project called Popcorn that looked into direct and indirect impacts of the pandemic.
Which 2020's moment had the biggest impact on you? Are there any we missed? Be sure to let us know in the comments below.
He talked about NATO expansionism, and I think there you have it, really, what Vladimir Putin is really concerned about restoring the might of Russia at the expense of the people of Ukraine.